My full name at birth was Milton Mann. We were too poor to have the middle initial. And we were named after my father's father. I was born in the Bronx at, I think, Dr. Left's hospital, small little hospital on the Grand Concourse. And that was on May 15th, 1927. I was the oldest of the three of us, and Irv is 4 years younger, and then Ken was 8 years younger. So we were essentially 4 years apart. My mother's maiden name was Regina Foss. My father's name is Morris Munowitz.
So how did your name change from Munowitz to Mann?
Well, in a short story, one of my first accounting jobs was for a CPA firm, and the firm's name was David B. Jacobs and Company. And the manager that I worked under was a fellow named Joe Blumenthal. And then he comes to me and says, you know, your name is hard to pronounce. Would you mind if we used Mann when we addressed you? And I didn't think much of it at the time, and it was the first job. So we accepted it. It stuck because we stayed with the firm for a good number of years. And if you asked me today if I had any regrets about it, probably do, because it is a family name.
So when did your parents come to this country?
I believe they came to this country after World War I. And they moved and lived in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. They were coming from Krakow, which is in Poland. And my mom, who was a happy-go-lucky gal who liked to have a good time, and my father was more on the serious side. After a while, and after they married and started a family, the woman stayed home. And my father tried to be the entrepreneur. He had a relationship with my Uncle Sam, which was his brother. And truth to tell, they never were very successful. One of them was known as the M&S Cafeteria, which was at 121 East Broadway. It was very hard work for my dad. There were periods when he worked 7 days a week, and there were times when he had a 6th day, and then we had family outings. We went as far as Orchard Beach. And as we got a little older, we did extensive traveling to what I call the Borscht Belt. Borscht Belt is the Catskills, and it's, I'd say, between 90 and 100 miles from New York City. And in those days, it would take 4.5, 5 hours to get there. There were certain hills that I can remember cars would overheat and pull over on the side. And after you traveled for 2.5 hours, you stopped at a place called the Red Apple Inn, and the folks found different places over the years. But essentially, that was the extent of our travel.
What about in the city? What sorts of places would you go for entertainment?
The Bronx Zoo was very exciting. Then there was Crotona Park, and Well, then we would go to Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam had a soda fountain, and he would make us the best malted in the whole world, and he would supplement it with a pretzel, and that was a big treat. The place where we spent a lot of time, we moved probably 1, 2, 3 times that I could recall. We once were in a walk-in apartment on Hughes Avenue. That was in the East Bronx. And then we moved to Marcy Place, which is where we lived till I went off to the Army, where my mother continued to live for a while. If I had to guess, the whole apartment was 600 square feet, 7 maybe, for the 5 of us. And the 3 boys slept in 1 bedroom, and it was a mixed neighborhood, and from time to time, the quote Italian kids would attack the Jewish kids, and sometimes we had little gang fights, but it was a relatively quiet neighborhood. When you played stickball in the streets and you measured the bases by the number of sewers that you could hit a ball, that was one of the fun games we had.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you pretty athletic growing up?
No way. I was the last guy to be picked for the baseball team.
So what sorts of things then did you do after school?
Well, we managed to work in silly jobs, like I'd stay in front of the A&P near Jerome Avenue and carry packages home for ladies who would then give me a nickel or a dime tip. It's very interesting. We never really felt deprived. And so if we lived in a walk-up apartment, that was what life was about. So I gather that they were hard times, but I view the days as being very content.
Did you have a favorite relative growing up?
Yeah, I described going to the mountains, the Catskills, and there I had Uncle Ben. And Uncle Ben was a furrier. He was retired. And what I loved about my Uncle Ben, who was married to Aunt Ellen, and they had no children, was he was a fisherman. And he took me fishing, and we loved our fishing. I loved fishing with him.
Now, did your other brothers go fishing with him as well, or?
Well, yes. When we came up to the mountains,
Was that like in the summertime?
it was only summer. And before we would go to the mountains, Uncle Ben would take me for a week or 2. And I remember one year when I was, say, 13 or 14, when we worked as a bellhop at the Laurel's Country Club on Sackett Lake. And again, I had a very successful beginning to my career. They wanted me to be a busboy initially, and you could get a job at that young age because it was the war years. Well, I put 4 ice buckets on a tray, and I was walking near the entrance, putting them on the table, when the tray tilted, and 4 buckets fell on the floor. simultaneously the siren rang to invite everybody into the hotel. I started the job at 11. This was about 12, and I was fired at 12:10. Several people did have serious falls, so they permitted me to work at the bar, where instead of carrying a big container of water, I had a 1-ounce glass of whiskey to serve, and there I was successful. So those are the fun work experiences we had.
Mm-hmm. What were your brothers like as kids?
Well, they were interesting. Irv was a tall fella. He's about, when he was full height, I think he was about 6'3". And although he was 4 years younger, he was a tough guy. And when anybody would pick on me, my 4-year younger brother would be there to protect me. He was good-spirited. We had a lot of fun fooling around with Mom, who also liked to play, literally play with us. And then we had Kenny, and Kenny was, as I told you, 4 years younger than Irv. And from the time he was in kindergarten, he enjoyed drawing. And the three of us would sometimes get Mom, who was very short, in the middle and start pushing her around playfully. So we had fun. Irv was a good student. Ken would rather draw pictures than bother with his homework.
So what was school like for you?
School was neat. I enjoyed school. I was an A student, B plus sometimes. Worst subject was language. The 3 years of French could basically permit me to say good morning, and that's about it.
So what were your favorite subjects?
The math and the science. Mm-hmm. My dream was to go into the sciences, chemical engineering. I think at times we thought about medicine. When we got ready to pick a career, we got into trouble because my father passed away, and so we were busy trying to get out of school so we could go to work. I could get my 17 credits in business courses and be finished by 12 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So that's a long way around of telling you why we ended up in the business world instead of in the science field.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the happiest memories of your childhood growing up?
I think the trips up to the mountains. I remember once finding a pond, being all alone, and catching 2 of the largest pickerel I ever saw, and bringing them home on a branch, and they were wiggling and jumping around, and I was so excited on the catch. It was like I'd caught a whale. And my mother cooked it up, and that was fun and exciting and memorable. The dream of catching the big fish. My work experiences were fun. Going back to the Laurels Country Club, we worked at the bar, and the bar was all glass enclosed. So after the last customer left, I'd say like 2 in the morning, one of us was obligated to stay at the bar because of the fact there was a glass enclosure. Literally stay overnight, acting as a night watchman.
And how old were you?
15. So when the last manager left, we opened the doors and 4 or 5 of our buddies would come back in, and we might enjoy a Coke or a beer, and we would play poker. So we didn't get much sleep, but we did have what we considered fun.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you enlist in the Army, and how?
Well, we graduated in January from high school, Bronx High School of Science. I think it was 1944. I think it was in the service from 44 to 46. I think 2 years, 1 month, and 17 days. But you were entitled to, if you passed certain exams and had certain grades, to go to what was called an ASTRP program. And you had to be 18 to enlist in the Army, but by enlisting at 17, I was able, because of the grades and so on, to go off to college. And I went to Norwich University, which is in Northfield, Vermont. I remember the first trip to Vermont and being cold, and we were not properly dressed. But it also was like the first time I was away from home.
So where did you do your basic training then?
In New Jersey. We went to Fort Dix, and from Fort Dix we went to Alabama, Fort McClellan. At Fort McClellan, it was 17 weeks of basic training. Basic training exposes you to learning how to use rifles and guns, and it teaches you how to dig a trench so that when a tank rolls over you, which was actually an experience, you felt the little pieces of dirt falling on your helmet, and for that very searing moment, you said, did I really dig deep enough?
Where did you get sent overseas, and what was your job there?
In a town called Weinheim, and it was the 15th Cavalry Group, and what we were an army of occupation. We were in S3, and S3 is information and intelligence. It wasn't a frightening time. The destruction of war we saw in towns that were totally demolished. We met a very nice girl named Lilo, who was a German who worked for the U.S. Army. We spent a fascinating few days at the Nuremberg war crime trials and sat, within a few feet of the leaders of Hitler's regime. Goering and Hess wasn't there, Ribbentrop, and that was a fascinating experience. We did take trips on furloughs, and I did find an uncle in Paris, my mother's brother, and spent a delightful time with them. Uncle Andre, Tante Blanche, and their son Roland. And the way I found out that my father was sick and that it looked very critical was the Red Cross notified me. Then they arranged for me to go home. And we got home to find my father, who was quite ill. And he felt weak, but there was nothing else to do, so he went to work. He continued to work, although we all knew that it was just a matter of time. One day we went to a movie, and there was a song, Oh How We Danced on the Night We Were Wed. It was a very touching song, and my father started to cry in the movie because it related to his marriage and his wife and his family. And it's a memory that I continue to have. He died shortly thereafter. And again, the funeral had a little funny twist to it. For some reason, our family had a reputation for being late. So if they went to a social event, we were unfortunately always late. Well, my father was late to his funeral. The hearse broke down on a bridge. So he showed up late, and in the tears, the family, who had this sort of funny sense of humor, saw a little humor in that experience. So, then we continued doing what we were supposed to do.
So how did life change for you then?
Well, I operated the cafeteria at 121 East Broadway. There was an interesting crowd. We had the East Side gangsters come in. Some of them were friends. We had to buy protection. And I said, why would we need protection? And this would be a very nice man. He said, this is a bad neighborhood. Well, so far we've had no trouble. The next day there was a garbage can through our window. So we bought protection. I think we did that for about 3 years and then gave it up and said, I'm not going to go
Now, were you going to school at this point?
No, we didn't have time.
Yeah.
So we sold the business, got very little money for it. But I went back to City College, which was, I felt I had an allegiance to City College where I had been accepted. But the other part of that consideration was the fact that by being at City College, I was close to home. And then I had the routine of going to school in the morning, eating lunch, doing some homework, working as an accountant part-time, and then working in a restaurant. So what I ended up doing is having a BBA and an MBA. To get the MBA, you had to write a thesis. And the thesis was based on collapsible corporations. And it won the Seidman and Seidman Award in taxation. And from there we went to our first full-time accounting job, which was David B. Jacobs and Company. It was at 19 Rector Street, and it's at the foothill of Manhattan. So because of our impressive academic record, we earned $35 a week, and we moved up rather quickly to $40 and $45 a week.
So getting back to your personal life, how did you meet Norma?
When I was in school, Alpha Mu Sigma AMS was a fraternity I joined, and our fraternity met a sorority that Norma was not a member of, but a friend had invited her. The fellas were really interested in the girls, but they were more interested in a fight that was going on that Friday. And so the girls decided to dance, and I had some feeling about two girls dancing together, and so I interrupted one of them. Turned out to be Norma Frank. And we chatted. We went home to her house, sat in the living room, I think till her dad came home. I thought I was in trouble, sitting on a couch with this young lady. But he was very pleasant. And that was the beginning of our getting together.
So why 3 years?
Well, I had a concern. I had a family. I asked my Uncle Ben what did he think of my attachment to this young lady. And my Uncle Ben was a little more practical. He had suggested that she seems to be a poor girl, and you know, you have so many responsibilities. But if you love her, then you do what your heart tells you to do. So Uncle Ben gave his approval. So that happened 3.5 years later.
And how many years have you been married?
Well, Norma's been married 54 years, and I guess I go with that.
Where did you get married? What was your wedding like?
We got married off the Grand Concourse, or on the Grand Concourse. There was a formal wedding. My dress code was a white dinner jacket that was furnished to me by my next door neighbor. And we had a good time.
What about your honeymoon? Where did you go and how did you go?
Well, we had a elaborate honeymoon. We went to Canada, and we went in this ancient 42 Plymouth. And every 50 miles we stopped and put a quart of oil in the car. And we went to Mount Morenci Falls. And we almost had an American tragedy there. As I told you, I loved fishing. And we went fishing one day in a beautiful lake, and we were in the middle of this lake, and I gave Norma one of my favorite fishing rods, and she cast out with my favorite fishing rod, and the lure went out, and then all of a sudden the rod went out and the handle went out and everything was in the water. And then my beloved saw the look in my eyes and proceeded to jump into the lake with the with her heavy wool sweater and her socks and her heavy shoes, and I think she almost sank immediately. But she we got her to hold on to the side of the boat, but we couldn't get her in the boat. And I say, you know the story of the American tragedy where somebody never got out of the lake. But I finally succumbed to the thought that my fishing rod could possibly be replaced, but maybe my wife couldn't. So she hung on to the side of the boat till we got to, and I rowed to the shallow end of the pond.
Parenting came soon after. What were the girls like as kids?
Well, they developed personalities. I think Madeline was always the very proper person, but we created that proper person, I think. She had perfect clothes and she was the good girl. Laura, she felt that she was different, but she was very headstrong. And I don't know if Norma mentioned the one time we went to a recital and Laura was in a ballet class. And we were parents and we were very proud of her. But when Laura curtsied, everybody else stood on their toes. So we said, we thought she was fantastic, but we said, Laura, there was a couple of times when you were doing something and the rest of the class was doing something else. Dad, they were all wrong. And she meant it. Pamela was the young lady who got away with everything, because she was at that time the baby. And now I think it's almost the reverse. She's the proper lady.
So what's it mean to you now to have 3 girls in your life?
They're loving daughters. They're facing extraordinary challenges. As a family, I feel very attached to the 3 girls and to their children. And it's exciting seeing the children grow up. Mm-hmm. A trick to being a grandparent, I guess, if you could play catch with Zachary or throw some baskets or take the kids fishing, that's the way you could communicate. I love to kid with them, And in terms of how they will turn out would be, if you had a wish, it'd be nice to see. But they're changing to very interesting characters.
Switching gears to work, how did you get started with Jesse Hartman?
I did audit work. Someone who had a few more years than I had in experience handled the Hartman account, and he quit. So they asked me to come up here. I did the audit, and I met the man, and the man was a tough real estate businessman. And he had driven the controller, the CFO, whatever you want to call him, to drink. And one day the controller disappeared, and Hartman was concerned. Well, he disappeared. Did anything disappear with him? And I had to do a special audit. Well, after I finished the audit, nothing was taken. The man just couldn't tolerate the pressure. Hartman turned to me and said, "Would you like to take his job?" And I felt that I had a promising job in the accounting firm. And so I went back to my superior. It wasn't Blumenthal, it was Kaufman, who was the senior partner. And he said, Milt, nobody has lasted with Hartman more than a couple of years, or less even. I would think, for your sake, you ought not to take the job. But the job had an interesting challenge. Instead of $80 a week, I could make $120 a week. And I also was entitled to an apartment. And that was a big opportunity. And so I took the job. We're now with the family easily 50 some odd years. And he passed away, I'd say about 20 years ago, 22 years ago. And I continued to run the family business. And one of the interesting things that happened out of this job was he didn't pay comparatively well, but there were always opportunities. He would be building a new job. So instead of giving you a raise, he would say, you have 10% of this job, or you have an interest in the job. How much money do you have, Milt? And we would contribute the dollars we had. And that turned out to be a great experience, because over this long period of time, the equities have grown. So it's been good for us, our family personally. And there was one other point to bring out, and that was Hartman was the original brains. There was a Lloyd Fowler who was the engineer, and I was, quote, the financial brain. And so it was really a three-party operation. But Lloyd Fowler was bright, exciting fellow. Hartman, I say, was a German chap, but at the end, if you got past the noise, he was a decent fellow. And so I admired him, enjoyed Lloyd's company. I would have described Lloyd as being my best friend. Lloyd would say, you know what, Milt, we got to get a tennis game going. And at 4 o'clock, we'd go out and play tennis, even if there was some work to be done. We managed to get it in by coming in earlier or working the next day a little later. So,
Now, was he someone that helped you get involved in sailing initially?
Well, Lloyd was a sailor, a superb sailor, but my first sailing experiences were actually with a Jack Alexander, a neighbor of mine, and we would sail on an ensign, a relatively small sailboat.
And where was that?
Long Island Sound.
When did you start your own accounting firm, and how many years did you have that?
The accounting firm was started out as like a hobby, but it developed. When I was out on the island, living in Queens, nearby Norma's sister Connie and Cal, I would do tax returns. And when I came up here, I felt doing tax returns would keep me, my mind focused on the tax law. Well, that grew, and from there I took in a partner, and then a third partner came along. It was always called Mann and Company, and in fact today it's still called Mann and Company. Over a period of years, I retired from the firm, and it was a buyout of my interest. And as I say, the firm is still going on, and it seems that some of the original clients that we had 50 years ago are still there. I loved the accounting because I met people and I enjoyed working with people.
So your love of travel, where does that come from, and what's so attractive about travel to you?
It's just an enjoyment of seeing different parts of the world. Again, if you love people, if you like to find the challenge, because going to a foreign country, speaking the language or not speaking the language is of interest.
What have been some of your favorite places that you've been to?
Going to Israel was an unbelievable challenge, because then you were being thrown back thousands of years. It is the birth of all religions. The history that is in every street and every stone that you pass. And I think the people are very high-spirited, good people. So I'd love to go back to the Mideast if it was ever a place that one could travel. So favorite spots would be Israel, South France, Costa Rica, the DR that I saw through Pamela and David's eyes. The British Virgins, where we've sailed a few times, are a neat place to go.
So going back to family, tell me a little bit about Irv and Ken as adults and when you got to see them.
Irv moved out to the island, and he was the school teacher. So I didn't see Irv as much as I would have liked to. And it was, again, just because work was a serious issue. But we did get together for the holidays, the Thanksgiving and the Passover, and we did try to see Irv as often as we could. Ken, on the other hand, was the bachelor, He was in town. The girls loved him. He was a real fun person. We would take the girls into his pad. It was on 71st Street and 3rd Avenue. Great location. We were extremely close to Ken. We were extremely close to his many girlfriends, and they became part of our family. Irv's death at age 42, and 4 years later, Ken's death at age 42 was just mind-boggling to me and to our family. And
So young. How
But-
did they die?
totally Irv died of a heart condition. He went to a doctor and said, "I'm not feeling well." And the doctor said, "Well, you're tired or something." Irv was a teacher of the mentally retarded. I think they have a more sensitive name. But he just didn't wake up. And Ken was, again, a bizarre story. He was feeling trouble, and the doctor said, "Get to the hospital." And it was a rainy day. He went down, he crossed the street, and he died on a street corner on 71st and 3rd Avenue. Relatively of heart, relatively of good health. Ken enjoyed life. He had a buddy who would fly him off. The two of them would go off to Paris in a private plane, then come back, and he'd go to work. At work, I've gone to his office as an artist. He worked for American Heritage, and they would play at work. He had a delightful job. So
So how do you make peace with things after your two brothers die?
well, all of these things, if anything, say, enjoy your children, enjoy your day, go out of your way to do something different. That, I guess, is the lesson, and to think of how to remember them. We miss the brothers. I keep thinking that if they were around for some of the happy events that we've enjoyed, they would have been ecstatic. I mean, they would have been very much part of the good things we've enjoyed. So that's our reflection on my two brothers.
So you've lived in Stamford for about 50 years. What does this area and location mean to you?
I love where we are. I wake up very often and get into the pool or take a walk. Haven't been doing that much bike riding, but walk down to the river, and so I love it here. I've got a neat little house in Florida, in Palm Beach Gardens. We have great friends to play golf with and go out to dinner with. So it's neat so far.
What have been some of your favorite trips that you've gone on with the whole family?
Well, we started a tradition of every other year, and we've had about 5 of those. Uh, and I guess the last one was the highlight. We ended up in Ecuador, and then we went to the Galapagos Islands. The kids ran around the boat. The experience of being in the Galapagos was a phenomenon. It was a real happening. Some of the other trips we've taken, I thought, also panned out beautifully. My brother Irv's son, Gary. Irv had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Gary is almost a son to me. And I remember taking him when he was 13, taking him on some of the trips we took. It was a boat trip, a houseboat trip. And that was a neat experience.
Any regrets?
Mom died alone in her apartment. The fact that she was alone was a regret.
Mm-hmm.
Norma's mom, we had in our area, and we felt good about the fact that we were close to Norma's mom.
There was another turning point that you mentioned, and that was when you had your bout with melanoma. When did that happen, and how did that change things?
The significance of the surgery and the fact that melanoma is the most serious of skin cancer did put a little attitudinal twist on the way I saw things. Created the desire to do more and enjoy the sunshine routine. I guess it also relates to the fact about 4 years ago I had bypass surgery. When Norma asked, could we take him by ambulance to another hospital, the doctor said, I wouldn't take that chance. So we had a surgery right then and there. So to respond to your question, I guess as a young person, I was a more serious-minded person, and I can set my mind to see things a little more on the bright side.
Mm-hmm. If you had your life to do over, would you do anything differently?
No, again, it's a series of events. You don't really plan it. You live it. You try to keep your values. You try to give values where you think it's important. You try to help when you think it's important. The other reflection was my mom died at an early age. Mom was in her early 60s. My father was 56, I think. The 2 brothers at 42. And so the question is, why is this old fart still around? And it's a mistake, but we'll take advantage. We'll take advantage of it.